Walsall North. Any use?
Mr. Speaker, I hope you will forgive me if I look slightly bewildered being called to address a full House of Commons chamber. I've simply never had this experience previously. In fact, over the previous 2.5 years, I've got used to being called at the end of a debate to address a House of Commons chamber that's almost completely empty, and then being given 2 minutes to make a 10-minute speech. So, Mr. Speaker, if you like what you hear over the next few minutes, I would like to think you will call me early in debates, unlike your much-loved predecessor. But for the moment, Mr. Speaker, I'm just going to relish this amazing opportunity to talk to all of these people. And it is an incredible privilege to be seconding the gracious speech, but it's also an incredible privilege to follow on from my dear and good friend, the Honourable Member for Chatham and Aylesford. Now, if I remember correctly, she won her seat in 2010 from a Labour member. Now, if my maths is right, we've got 50 new Conservative MPs in this chamber that have won their seats from Labour members as well, and from right across the country, from Innismon to Ipswich, oh, you had to ruin the flow, didn't you? Come on, guys. You're meant to be nice. To me, I meant. Anyway, back to it. From Innismon to Ipswich, from Kensington to Blythe Valley. And I think anybody who's got a political bone in their body should just take a minute to remember how they felt when that Blythe Valley result came in. Now, Mr. Speaker, I won my own seat in 2017. But it was from a Labour member, but it was 1976 when the Conservatives last won that seat, and they only managed to win it at that time because John Stonehouse, the Labour MP, faked his own death. While on a business trip to Miami, he left a pile of clothes on the beach, pretending that he'd gone for a swim, never to be seen again, supposedly. Well, I tell you what, he was a damn fine swimmer. Because 5 weeks later, he turned up 10,000 miles away in Melbourne, Australia. Now, he was arrested and he tried to apply to a couple of countries for asylum, but that didn't happen, so he was deported back to the United Kingdom, and incredibly, while out on bail, he continued to serve as a Labour MP. Now, I'm not sure, but I don't think the Right Honourable Member for Witham, the Home Secretary, would allow such leniency these days. But I did find it amusing when I read a line on Wikipedia that said, the Labour Party were unhappy with this situation, but chose not to expel him. That sounds like a familiar theme these days, I think. Anyway, for those of us who are 2017 MPs, this has felt like a very precarious innings, like we're never more than 5 weeks away from a general election. So I was getting a bit concerned because my predecessor in terms of Conservative MPs, who is now Baron Hodgson of Abbots Astley, I think, hopefully Hansard will correct that if I got it wrong, he managed to serve 910 days as the MP for Walsall North. Now, when Parliament was dissolved on the 5th of November, I'd served 881 days. I know, thank you for playing your part. So I knew I had to win that election. I had to beat the Baron. But anyway, the good omen for me and for this incredible Conservative victory should have been apparent to me on the 27th of April this year, because with just a few days to go before the local elections, I was visited by a man who was, at that time, the humble backbencher, the Right Honourable Member for Uxbridge and South Ruislip. He wasn't the Prime Minister then. Anyway, to the House, the blonde bombshell was unleashed on the unsuspecting people of Bloxwich, and the result was truly magnificent to behold. Everybody who asked for a selfie was greeted with a beaming smile and an occasional tussle of those famous blonde locks. And when our tour reached its inevitable destination, the Bloxwich Showman, the future Prime Minister obviously pulled a pint of Thatcher's Gold. Now, I know what you're thinking, Mr. Speaker. You're thinking, so what? What was the consequence of this great visit? Well, the consequence for me was that in those local elections a few days later, we won 2 more council wards against the national trend, and for the first time ever, the Conservatives took control. First time in 20 years, the Conservatives took control of Walsall Council outright. Yeah. Now, that shouldn't have been a surprise, maybe, because over the past 3 years, we've had a blue-collar revolution. Yeah. The working people, the working class of Britain, have sent 2 shock results to Westminster. And who led both of those campaigns? One man who completely understands that actually what the public want, what ordinary working people want, is a government that will stay out of their way, but will ensure they have safe streets, a good standard of education for their children, and a great national health service when they need it. We now have a government and a Prime Minister that understands that and will deliver. Yeah. People lent us their vote in this election. We cannot let them down. We must not let them down. We will not let them down. Yeah. But Mr. Speaker, I think you know the answer to this question. What is the first priority for this country? Oh, you're supposed to say get Brexit done. Anyway, get Brexit done. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, in an interview immediately after the election result, I think I heard the Right Honourable Member for Hayes and Hollington, the Shadow Chancellor, say that he now understood that the public wanted to get Brexit done, but the Labour hadn't been listening. Now, in my constituency of Walsall North, 74% of people who voted in that referendum voted to leave. But that wasn't the interesting thing for me during the general election. When I was telephone canvassing, I spoke to lifelong Lib Dem voters who had voted Remain in the referendum, but were now voting Conservative because they said they were real Democrats. Yeah. They knew how important it was for this country to deliver on the result of that referendum. Yeah. But Mr. Speaker, Walsall North is like many of the constituencies we've just won. It's among the most deprived constituencies in the country. But now we have a Prime Minister who completely understands that although ability is equally distributed across the country, opportunity is not. Yeah. And that's why we're going to transform further education system by investing in a huge new rebuild programme worth £1.8 billion. But investment in infrastructure is also incredibly important. There are towns like mine, Willenhall, where the manufacturing base has been decreased over recent years. So I was delighted to work with the Mayor of the West Midlands and secure the money for a new train station for Willenhall, because that train station will be a lifeline for that town. It will allow the people of Willenhall to travel to Birmingham or to Wolverhampton more easily for job opportunities or for education opportunities. But it will also allow people to travel in to Willenhall. So if we can continue to remediate those old industrial sites, we automatically free up new opportunities. And I'm imagining a time where we've got a robotic factory in Willenhall making goods that would otherwise be brought over from the other side of the world, therefore also reducing our carbon footprint. But, Mr. Speaker, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, what about the I'm going to look on the camera to see who said that. That's not what you were thinking, Mr. Speaker. I know you. You were thinking, what about the NHS? Is it safe in this Conservative government's hands? Mr. Speaker, let me tell you, it certainly is in Walsall North, because thanks to the Health Secretary, I've got £36 million for a new A&E department, which is going to increase capacity as well as improving conditions for staff and patients alike. What about the rest of the country, though? I don't know where to begin. 50,000 extra nurses. Thank you. 50 million extra GP practice appointments per year and 40 new hospitals. But what about the future of our great nation, Mr. Speaker? Well, I'm delighted to read that this Conservative government, by the end of this Parliament, will be investing a stonking £3.2 billion a year in research and development. Although I completely agree with the Honourable Member for Harborough, who said we simply cannot continue to have half of that money spent in just 3 cities, London, Oxford and Cambridge. We need to spread that throughout the country. So, Mr. Speaker, from my personal point of view, it certainly looks like the country's future, the future of the whole United Kingdom, is incredibly bright with this Conservative government. And so as we look to 2020 with a newfound spirit of optimism and ambition, it is my privilege, on behalf of the great people of the Black Country, to commend this gracious speech to the House.